Lap 57 of the 58-lap race. The battle for six comes to turn 6, and it ends in tears for, ultimately, both Alonso and Russell. As we play it through, you can see Russell very, very close through the apex, too close, gets a load of dirty air from Alonso, and ends up in the barriers. Now, these cars are very aero-sensitive. If you get that close behind a car in front, you've got to make adjustments, and Russell was simply going too quick for the dirty air, not the clean airflow over his car that he would hope and was probably expecting. 2 questions. This is a complex issue, really. Alonso was given 20 seconds of penalty, a drive-through equivalent, which is a harsh penalty compared to most things that you see incidents investigated for. A couple of things. Was this dangerous, erratic driving? And was it the cause for an incident for George Russell? So firstly, let's cover off if it was erratic driving. And we can jump on board with Fernando looking back to George Russell. And you can just hear that actually this was a little bit erratic from Alonso. As we're coming up, backs off the throttle, goes again on the throttle, and then comes into the corner. That is unusual, and that meant that Russell caught him at a much quicker speed than anyone would expect following another car. So certainly this was unusual. Alonso hadn't done that in 56 laps previous, nor had anyone else. It's not something that the driver behind would particularly expect. We can see from this bit of data here, this is Fernando Alonso through the first half of the lap. We are looking at this corner as turn 6. And you can see the red line on lap 57 is clearly running a very different speed around this area to the blue line. Alonso, he backs off the throttle. You can see there where the red line drops down and the blue line carries on flat out, as you'd normally do. Fernando backs off the throttle. He actually nudges the brake very slightly and then picks up the throttle, just gently coming into the corner again before braking and continuing the corner like normal. So there is an adjustment there from Alonso. Why did he do it? Well, because straight after this is the biggest overtaking spot on the circuit. There's DRS and a long run to turn 9 and 10. And that was where Russell had been close previously. And he is trying to play games with Russell. He's trying to just put the Mercedes driver out of kilter. And it's actually backfired, and the Mercedes driver's gone into the wall. And so certainly there is a case here for erratic driving. It looks like it is erratic driving.
I really don't know what happened, to be honest. I was half a second behind Fernando on the entry of the corner. And then suddenly, before the apex, I was right in his gearbox and lost the car, ran wide, and just unfortunately the wall was, ran wide, hit the wall, and then it was obviously a dramatic few seconds after that.
Problems on the throttle.
Virtuals have to go. Virtuals have to slow down, get your delta positive.
I cannot go full throttle. Very, very stiff.
So Russell has reported that he's okay. Fernando, just info.
The next question is, though, has erratic driving always been punished? The answer is no, because this is Fernando Alonso ahead of Lewis Hamilton in Abu Dhabi. Just 3 races before this, the final round of last year, doing exactly the same thing. Alonso comes out of the pits, Hamilton is on a flying lap, a Mercedes behind the Aston Martin of Alonso, and he backs off at this point, way before the braking zone. But you can see the 150 board up here. The braking zone is about 70 metres for this corner. So he's backed off way early, and Hamilton has had to back up, check up, just to stay behind Alonso. They're playing DRS games here, which is a little bit of what Alonso was trying in Melbourne as well. So this is the data between Alonso and Alonso from Abu Dhabi, and it's a very, very similar thing. We're looking at this area in Abu Dhabi coming into to turn 6, and Alonso once again backs off on the lap in question. He goes slow. He has a little brush of the brake. He tickles the throttle again. He brushes the brake again. He wants Hamilton to actually overtake him because they're playing DRS games, and then he enters the corner. Ultimately, in a similar sort of fashion, once he's realised that this is the time to go. But he is playing games. Crucially, there was no penalty. There was no repercussion for this from Fernando Alonso 3 races ago. And in Melbourne, he's slapped with a big penalty, a drive-through, which cost him 20 seconds of race time. And it's more than we've seen a penalty for many incidents recently. So erratic driving, yes, from Alonso. But is that consistent with what's happened before? The answer is no in this case. So certainly the stewards, whether they like it or not, they have looked at the outcome of George Russell ending in the barriers and actually ending up in the middle of the track, making the crash look more dramatic than it was. And that, I'm sure, is the reason that Alonso has been investigated as thoroughly and deemed punishable in this incident. But let's have a look more at Russell's point of view then. So we're coming through turn 5. He's got a decent amount of gap to Alonso ahead. The red light is going at the back of the Aston Martin. Now, Alonso had a bit of ERS issues. He's struggling with D-rate, so he's actually harvesting a lot of energy in the first part of the lap anyway. Russell is also making a switch change down here. You can see the dash changing as he's coming up towards turn 6, but there's a decent amount of space between the two cars. Now, Alonso is driving erratically, yes, confirmed. But is this dangerous? Because there's a big gap between Alonso's car and Russell's car. And this is not, I would say, a conventional brake test where the car behind has to jump on the brakes to avoid hitting the car ahead. In fact, as we play this through, the closest that Russell gets to Alonso is this far back. There's pretty much, you can fit another car between them. It's simply a case of he's got too close, going at full racing speed, and he's caught some dirty air, and that is what flicks George into an oversteer, which he corrects, and ends up in the wall. It's a significant crash, obviously. It's taken off the left-hand side of the car, but it's a crash that we've seen a few times before at this corner as well, a tricky corner. Now, what did Russell do coming into the corner as well? Let's have a look at his data. And actually, if we look at turn 6, the last thing he does before hitting the barrier there, you can see he does brake a little bit earlier because he's catching Alonso. He brakes 11 metres earlier for this corner, and it's not enough. He still ends up in the dirty air and firing off to the barrier. He actually steers. We see the steering trace. He's a little bit more aggressive on the steering on the red lap, the crash lap, where he comes in, he steers more aggressively, unsettling the car in the dirty air. But maybe he's just surprised at this point by how close he is to Fernando and makes a more instinctive steering trace, which would unsettle the car. But no doubt, having the dirty air is the key issue for George Russell. But actually, if we look back at the first corners of this lap, he's also braking earlier in these corners as well. He's braking 7 metres earlier at turn 1. He's braking 6 metres earlier at turn 3. He's actually braking less hard. But if you look at the brake trace down the bottom here, he's jumping on 6 metres earlier there. So he's not changed massively in towards turn 6 for a car that it has gone very slowly coming into the corner. Effectively, he's stayed full throttle coming right up to the corner. He's then braked a little bit earlier, but not much difference compared to the first half of the lap where Alonso hasn't been having his erratic driving either. And then he's found himself too close to the Aston Martin and into the barriers. And overall, I just can't help but feel, watching it from Russell's onboard, from his point of view here, yes, Alonso slows up. Yes, it is technically erratic, and that gives the stewards certainly a reason to penalise him. It's inconsistent penalty, but technically, according to this particular circumstance, it's difficult for Alonso to argue with it. But looking from here, there is enough space between the two cars. And as he's coming in, was there something more that Russell could do rather than steam in full speed, brake a little bit earlier, but only really similar to what he'd done earlier on in the race, and then end up in the barriers? Certainly, George has got to at least shoulder a chunk of the blame, if not all of it. It's a blurred picture, but you know that Alonso, he does operate in these grey areas. He does it all the time, whether it's last year in Abu Dhabi, whether it's, I think, cheekily causing a yellow flag in Baku qualifying a couple of years ago to stop people improving. There's countless times where Fernando Alonso operates in these grey areas, and I think Fernando knew that he had operated in this one as well, because once again, if we go back to his data here, you can see in the stretch after he's just seen Russell in the barriers, he starts playing with the throttle pedal here and saying that there's something wrong with the throttle. All these traces where the red starts coming down, he's blipping the throttle, coming back on. Coincidentally, that hadn't happened before. So I think he's seen Russell in the mirrors go off and thought, oh, maybe that was a little bit too close. So he's trying to give himself a little bit of an excuse there. Or it happens to be a legitimate throttle issue the moment his rivals just ended up in the barriers. Seems unlikely to me. So I think Fernando knows he's operating in the grey areas. There's certainly an argument to penalise him. In my opinion, it's maybe a little bit harsh on Fernando. I don't think it's particularly dangerous what he did. I think there was enough space between the two cars for him to back off slightly, and the two cars were never close to contact. There was always a good amount of space. It's simply a dirty air issue, of which we're opening a can of worms with that one. So it's going to be a big talking point. It's going to rage on, I'm sure, for a couple of weeks, and the drivers will make their thoughts known in Japan in the drivers' meeting.